Good morning students, and welcome back to the third part of the video on direct and indirect speech. Today we'll talk about different types of sentences and how to change them from direct speech to indirect speech. As you all know that there are four types of sentences. And what are they? Number 1, assertive sentences, also known as declarative sentences or statements. Number 2, interrogative sentences. Number 3, imperative sentences. And number 4, exclamatory sentences. Assertive sentences are those in which a statement is made. These sentences which expresses yes or no sense. Okay, sentences which expresses yes sense are affirmative sentences. For example, you are a good student. Another example, he writes a letter. And the sentences which expresses no sense is a negative sentence. For example, she is not a good singer. You do not go there. And we put a full stop at the end of these sentences. Then interrogative sentences are the sentences which we use to ask a question. For example, how are you? What is your father's name? WH questions like what, when, where, why, who, etc. Then there are other questions also like are you hungry? Do you read a novel? These are yes or no questions. Yes and no questions begins with auxiliary or helping verbs. And what are these? Is, am, are, was, were, has, have, had, do, does, did, shall, will, can, could, may, might, should, would, etc. So these auxiliary or helping verbs, when we put them or we start a question with them, then these are the yes or no questions. And we also put the mark of interrogation at the end of these sentences. Then third type is imperative sentences. Sentences which express order, advice, request, command, etc. You as subject remains hidden in these sentences. Like if we write in affirmative, for example, stand up or bring a glass of water. And in negative, we can say don't stand up, don't bring a glass of water. Then the fourth type is exclamatory sentences, which expresses some sudden feelings as joy, sorrow, surprise, hate, wonder, applause, etc. And we put mark of exclamation. Okay, till here is it clear? Then now let's take one by one. First we'll begin with the statements. What rules you have to follow while changing a sentence from direct speech into indirect speech. The first rule which you have to keep in mind is that tenses, pronouns and possessive adjectives and adverbs of time and place change in statements, in declarative sentences. Then secondly, statements in the indirect speech are generally introduced by the conjunction that. For example, the teacher said to the girl, I know you and your mother. In indirect speech, we will write, the teacher told the girl that she knew her and her mother. Then in interrogative sentences or questions, suppose the direct question is like this. He said, where is she going? Indirect question we'll write, he asked where she was going. In reporting a question in the indirect speech, the following changes are necessary. Number 1, tenses, pronouns and possessive adjectives and adverbs of time and place change as in statements. Number 2, the interrogative form of the verb changes to the affirmative form. The question mark or the mark of interrogation is therefore omitted in indirect questions. For example, he said, "Where does she live?" When we change it into indirect speech, we will write, "He asked where she lived." Then if the introductory verb is say in direct speech, it must be changed to a verb of inquiry. For example, ask, inquire, wonder, demanded, etc. When we change it into indirect speech. For example, direct speech, he said, "Where is the station?" In indirect, we'll say, he asked where the station was. Another example, direct speech, he said to me, "What are you doing?" Indirect speech, he asked me what I was doing. Direct speech, he said to me, "Do you know the way?" Indirect speech, he inquired of me if I knew the way. Then another thing is, ask, inquire, wonder can also be used in direct speech, but there they are then usually placed at the end of the sentence. For example, in direct speech we can write, "Where do you live?" asked the stranger. In direct speech, the stranger inquired where I lived. Another example, "Where is the station?" he inquired. In direct speech, he inquired where the station was. Then ask can be followed by the person addressed in indirect speech. For example, direct speech, he asked, "What have you got in your bag?" In direct speech, he asked me what I had got in my bag. But one thing keep in mind, inquire, wonder, want to know cannot take an indirect object. So if we wish to report a question where the person addressed is mentioned, we must use ask. For example, direct speech, he said, "Mary, when is the next train?" Indirect speech, he asked Mary when the next train was. If we use inquire, wonder or want to know, we must omit Mary. When the question is not introduced by an interrogative word, WH word, the reporting verb is followed by whether or if. Or whether or if is used after such introductory verbs whenever the direct question admits of one of two answers, either yes or no. For example, direct speech, "Is anyone there?" he asked. Indirect speech, he asked, we can use if also and we can use whether also here. He asked if anyone was there, or he asked whether anyone was there. Another example, direct speech, he said to me, "Do you know the way?" Indirect speech, he inquired of me if I knew the way. Direct speech, he said, "Will you listen to such a man?" Indirect speech, he asked them whether they would listen to such a man. Direct speech, "Do you know Hari?" he said. Indirect speech, he asked if or whether I knew Hari. So if is the more usual and whether when a choice has to be made. For example, do you want to go by air or sea? So you have to make a choice. The travel agent asked. This is the sentence. So the travel agent asked whether I wanted to go by air or by sea. So I have to choose. Then next questions beginning with shall I, shall we in indirect speech. They can be of four kinds. Number one, speculations or requests for information about a future event. These follow the ordinary rule about shall or will. Speculations are usually introduced by wonder. For example, shall I ever see them again? He wondered. He wondered if he would ever see them again. Another example, when shall I know the result of the test? She asked. She asked when she would know the result of the test. Then second, requests for instructions or advice. These are expressed in indirect speech by ask, inquire, etc. with should or the be plus infinitive construction. Requests for advice are normally reported by should. For example, shall we post it, sir? He said. He asked the customer if they were to post or if they should post it. Another example, what shall I say, mother? She said. She asked her mother what she should say, means request for advice. Then third is offers. Example, shall I bring you some tea? It could be reported as he offered to bring me some tea. And in case of suggestions, for example, shall we meet at the theatre? It could be reported as he suggested meeting at the theatre. Then questions beginning with will you, would you, could you, how we change them. These may be ordinary questions but also may be requests, invitations, or very occasionally commands. For example, he said, will you be there tomorrow? So this is an ordinary question. And how we'll change it? He asked if she would be there the next day. The next example, would you like to live in New York? He asked. Now here it is a kind of an invitation. Would you like to live in New York? He asked. And how we'll change it? He asked if I would like to live in New York. Now another example is, this is showing request. Will or would you file these letters please? He said. And we'll change it like this. He asked or he told me to file the letters. The next type of sentences are the imperative sentences, in which we give commands or we make requests. In reporting a command or request in the direct speech, what we have to do? Number one, the introductory verb is changed into request, beg, command, encourage, entreat, forbid, implore, invite, advise, remind, urge, warn, etc. Number two, the verb in the reported speech is put in the infinitive. For example, Rima said to Rani, go away. Okay, so it's a kind of a command we can say, or an order. Rima ordered Rani to go away. Another example, he said to him, please wait here till I return. So it's a kind of a request. He requested him to wait there till he returned. Next example, the teacher said to the students, work hard and be regular in your studies. The teacher advised the students to work hard and be regular in their studies. Then, next example, he said to the students, do not make a noise. He forbade the students to make a noise. Next example, he said, be quiet and listen to my words. This we change as, he urged them to be quiet and listen to his words. The next point is when let in the direct speech expresses a proposal or suggestion, we may use should and change the reporting verb into propose or suggest. For example, he said to us, let us return home. So it's a kind of a suggestion. Okay, and we'll change it like this. He proposed to us that we should return home. Another example, she said to us, let us have some music. And we'll change it like this. She proposed or she suggested to us that we should have some music. But when let does not express a proposal, it should be changed into might be allowed, or into some other verb according to the sense. For example, he said, let me have some tea. This can be changed as he wished that he might have some tea. Next example, Hari said to his friends, let me do my work, please. Hari requested his friends that he might be allowed to do his work. The next type of sentences are exclamatory sentences. In reporting a wish or an exclamation in the indirect speech, we have to keep the following things in mind. Number 1, the introductory verb is changed into wish, bless, pray, exclaim, declare, etc. with such phrases as with regret, with delight, with sorrow, wherever necessary. Then the interjections and exclamations such as oh, well, hurrah, alas, bravo are omitted and their sense is expressed by means of phrases. For example, in direct speech when we write, he said, alas, I am undone. In indirect speech, we'll write, he exclaimed sadly that he was undone. Next example, he said, bravo, you have done well. In direct speech, he applauded him saying that he had done well. So in this way, in this video and the two previous videos, we have discussed about the meaning of the direct speech and the indirect speech, what is reporting speech, what is reported speech, then the general rules, how to change a sentence from direct speech to indirect speech. We have to keep in mind the change in pronouns, the SON formula, that it changes according to the subject, the object, and then there is no change. Then change in tense, a chart I have given you. Then change in time and place, again I have provided a chart. Then there are different types of sentences as we have discussed today, like there are 4 types of sentences: the assertive sentences, the imperative sentences, the interrogative sentences, and the exclamatory sentences. And then how to change these different types of sentences into indirect speech. So students, I hope this topic is clear to you all now. Keep practicing and it will help you a lot in understanding the language and proper expression in writing as well as conversation. Thank you.